All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome in the room and online to Medical Grand Rounds. Before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to enrich our vibrant community. Before I introduce our speaker this morning, just a few announcements. First of all, I just wanted to take this opportunity to congratulate the Division of Pulmonary Medicine. I'm sure they're all asleep right now because they had a big party last night, but they just celebrated their 65th year anniversary. So congratulations to them. The second announcement is really important. I think today is the last day, if I'm not mistaken, for the flu shots and COVID shots. So please, all healthcare workers are eligible. I think they're still set up in Snell Hall. I went a couple of weeks ago and it's very quick. There's no lineups. So please make sure you get that done. And then last but not least, go Blue Jays. All right. So I am delighted to introduce our division director and section chief for dermatology, Dr. Robert Gniadecki. It took me 5 years to learn how to say his name properly. So he received his MD degree from Warsaw Medical School in Poland in 1991 and a PhD in health sciences from the University of Copenhagen in Denmark in 94. He completed his dermatology specialization in 2001 and holds certification in both Denmark and Canada. In 2010, he was appointed full clinical professor at the University of Copenhagen, and in 2015, he joined our university as professor of dermatology. Dr. Gniadecki has served as president of the Danish Dermatological Society, treasurer of the Canadian Dermatology Foundation, and board member of the European Society for Dermatological Research and the International Society for Cutaneous Lymphomas. He's an editorial board member of several international journals, including Journal of European Academy of Dermatology and Venereology, Dermatology, and Frontiers in Medicine. He's published over 300 peer-reviewed papers, his major contributions including developing the low-dose total skin irradiation protocol for cutaneous lymphomas, identifying lymphoma stem cells, and conducting clinical optimization of biological therapies in psoriasis. And what it doesn't say here is that Robert has some very interesting and eclectic personal hobbies, which I won't share broadly. I'm sure he'll share them with you, but they're just always very interesting to hear about, and we have great conversations about that. So over to you, Robert.
Welcome, everyone. Good morning in this early hour. I will not be talking about lymphomas. We'll be talking about the sun and the impact of sunshine on the skin, but also on general health. And why have I chosen this topic? I have been interested in photobiology for a very long time. I did even some research in my early days on photobiology, and I kind of found out that there's a huge public interest in this. So speaking to not dermatologists, but the broad public here, most of the dermatologists are sitting, but to the broad public, I thought I would pick up a subject which has more interest. So every May or June, we get a phone call or email from the press asking us, please give a statement about sun protection. Please give a statement about how should we deal with the sun during the summer. And if you have ever seen or heard those statements, they all look like this. I will try to advance my slides. They don't advance. Oh, now they advance. So here we have some example. It's always the same story. Say yes to photoprotection. Sun is dangerous. Put the sunscreen on. Do it every other hour. Use high SPF factor. It's very dangerous to be out in the sun. Put the cloth like this, wide brimmed hat, long sleeves during the summer. Then even there's some like slogans like Australians did. Sleep, slap, sick. I don't even remember what it means, but it is quite a catchy thing. And some other pamphlets will show you dangerous form of skin cancer. The black spots grow on your skin associated with the sun. Okay, even during winter, you should be very, very careful, using the SPF factor, even if you have darker skin. Okay, and this is your essential kit on the beach. So always the glasses high SPF, and it's kind of an ominous picture because the person actually left. And why did she leave? She left these essential things here. What is she going to do here? And if your kid doesn't look like this, you're a bad parent. You should give, the full equipment, the hat, the glasses, and the long-sleeved sun protective clothing. So all aggressive actions wake reactions. So if you look through the internet and through the papers, there will be growing amount of data showing that actually sun production may not be as good as dermatologists ask you to do. For example, they first started with people who work with marine life and oncology, and they noticed that this amount of sunscreens we're using, and then when you go to the water, the sunscreens get dissolved in the water, that actually affects marine life. So it kills the coral reefs, for example. So in some places in Australia, for example, you are not allowed to use sunscreen on the beach that can damage the coral reefs. They hit the reproductive system of everything from sea urchins to fish. So people were asking if the production of fish get affected by sunscreen, what about us? What our reproductive system? Even in dolphins, we found a lot of sunscreens accumulated in the tissues. This is my son's favorite YouTuber, Dr. Mike. So he had this YouTube thing whether sunscreen is good or bad for you, and he didn't really answer the question very concretely. And then there are again information coming that the sun can also have beneficial effects. Can be good for your sleep, for your well-being, mental health, cardiovascular health, and even serious journal like the New York Times brought some features about questioning whether we are overlooking the benefits of the sun. So my topic for today is to kind of show you a bit of the data and put the current recommendation probably in a perspective. But before I do that, I will need to give you like a 1 minute historical background on how this conversation came out. Because if you look like in the 17th, 18th century, nobody really thought about the sun. We took it as a natural part of the environment and nobody thought about sun protection. But the whole thing changed with this particular person, Niels Finsen. And I often mention this to my residents because this was the only dermatologist who got the Nobel Prize. Never happened again. Yes, and this was 1903. So Niels Finsen was a native of Faroe Islands, and he immigrated to Denmark, which was the same at this time was the same country, and he did the med school in Copenhagen, and he figured out that patients with lupus vulgaris, which is tuberculosis of the skin, was a huge problem. They get better if they're exposed to natural sunlight. So within 3 years, he proposed to the municipality of Copenhagen to create the institute that will cure patients with tuberculosis with sunlight. And he was given the money. Within a year, the building was there and he was treating patients. And the treatment spread all over the Europe. So here we have a picture from the textbook for nurses how to perform phototherapy in those patients. So he produced lenses, quartz lenses that focus light on the skin, and results were pretty good. So before antibiotics came around, this was the preferred treatment for lupus vulgaris. And he became a very famous doctor. So Nobel Prize 1903, you can see he's commemorated on many stamps. And if you go over to Copenhagen, there will be 2 statues of Niels Finsen. And this one, I was passing along this one every day when I was going in my residency to the Department of Dermatology and looking at this guy. I didn't for a long time know who this was. So Niels Finsen here. Okay. So this was a bit of enthusiasm and seeing light as a treatment, as a medicine. And he got some support from unexpected side, from the fashion world, from Coco Chanel. So before like 1920s, suntan was not in vogue, was kind of considered to be skin damage, peasants had browner skin because they were in the fields. But Coco Chanel changed all that. So she came suntanned from a trip to southern France and promoted this as a sign of health. And the picture of the beaches changed rapidly from this. So this painting is from the late from the 1900 to this. 1920. Suddenly, all the long robes were gone and bikinis came around, and people went to the beach on purpose to get some sun for beauty and health reasons. And very soon, phototherapy was also promoted into the sanatoria in Switzerland. So people who had tuberculosis were put out in the sun, like those lovely ladies here, and then were allowed to suntan naked. So the curtain was drawn around, and they enjoyed the sun. But this idyllic situation didn't last long. Already then, some researchers noticed there's a connection between skin cancer and sun, and I don't want to go deeply into this, but a paper from 1920 showed in a mouse model that sun produces skin cancer. And then in the 60s, probably one of the most influential papers in the history of dermatology, Skin Cancer and the Sun, beautifully written, putting great arguments. Starting 90,000 skin cancers will be diagnosed in the United States this year. And do you know what we have now? 3.6 million. Yeah. So they already sounded alarm in the 1960s on 90,000 cancers. Today we have much higher epidemic, and they were not in doubt. Sunlight, this is the cause, because of this excessive sun. So again, from nice beach life, relaxed, this created this situation we have today, fear of the sun and sun protection. So this is what I'm going briefly to do today. So I will give you conclusions beforehand. So I would like to demonstrate that ultraviolet is a carcinogen, but it is a weak carcinogen, and the benefits of sunlight may be greater than the benefits from sun protection. So my thesis will be a more balanced approach and less rigorous approach to sun protection. And I will also say that sun avoidance at all costs may have unintended health consequences that go beyond the skin. Okay, so first of all, evolution. Our skin evolves with the sun, which means sun is kind of important for our health. So this was very well figured. So when back then, before the Homo developed as a species, were covered by hair, and our skin under the hair was white. There was no pigmentation. When we're losing during evolution the body hair, and at this time the hominids were in Africa, there was very strong sun, we developed a number of mutations that allowed the skin to pigment to the very dark, and those mutations are listed here, and they and we still have some of those variants in the population. Interestingly enough, when the Homo sapiens began to migrate from Africa to the northern latitudes, we got new mutations that led to the loss of pigment. So my skin is not white, but lighter than many others. So I am the evolutionary consequence of this migration north. And again, you have a number of genes listed here. And those genes are reproducible from population to population. So there's a very strong evolutionary pressure on adjusting the skin color to the environment. And the usual explanation is this is because we need vitamin D. So if we have dark skin, we will not be able to synthesize vitamin D in the northern latitudes. And this is probably not true, because if you really look at the production of vitamin D in pigmented skin, it's not that much lower in pigmented skin versus white skin. It's only like a 30% lower, and you don't need much sun to have enough. You need like 15-20 minutes of sun exposure. So this is probably not the true explanation. Explanation is somewhere else. Explanation is that we need this adjustment to environmental sun for other purposes than vitamin D exposure. So let's jump into the data. How do we know that sun is beneficial? And I will start from the high-level data. This shows you the correlation between sun exposure this season and the overall mortality. Those curves have been known forever, but I'm always impressed when I look at this, how strongly the mortality is correlated to the season and sun exposure. So you can look at the northern and the southern hemisphere, and they will see that less mortality in the northern hemisphere during the summer. But if you go to the southern hemisphere, it's the opposite because they have winter. If you look at the equatorial countries, there's no difference in season. So seasons affect the definitely the overall mortality. A bit more specific, during COVID epidemics, number of papers showed correlation between sun exposure and COVID mortality, to the extent that in some hospitals in US, I believe in Nashville, they were putting patients outside for the sun, and they observed better survival of those patients compared to those who stayed inside. And the common explanation is, because the vitamin D, actually vitamin D supplementation does not work. So we also try to supplement people with vitamin D, and it has no influence on mortality whatsoever, or if it is, it's minimal. This has been noticed already in the time of Hippocrates, and there's a number of studies showing this relationship between sun exposure and mortality. And I just list those papers here, but I'd like to focus just on one piece of evidence, and this is the last one. And this is the melanoma of southern Sweden cohort. This is the only prospective study on sun exposure and associated diseases. So how was this done? So in Scandinavia, you can follow those big cohorts of patients. There's a system how to do it. It's much easier than in the US or in Canada. So in this case, almost 30,000 women randomly selected from the populations were followed for 20 years, and they were screened for the sun exposure and sun habits. And they were divided into 4 groups, and the question they were asked, and if they almost never went to the sun, they were considered to be a low exposure group. If they answered yes to all those questions, like do I go to the sun during summer, during the holiday, do I travel often south to get some sun, and do I use solarium or sun tanning beds, they will be considered to be the high exposure patients. And the purpose of the study was actually not to look at the health benefits. The purpose was to prove and calculate how many melanomas do they get. So the purpose was very different, but the results were kind of unexpected. Because truly enough, if you look at the maximum UV exposure, so those who answered yes to all 4 questions, they will have a slightly higher risk of melanoma. It's risk ratio of 1.3. And we'll come back to what it means. But if you look at many other indicators of health, like overall mortality, like cancer mortalities, any cancer mortality, or even mortality from melanomas they were always quite below those patients who never went to the sun. And you can look at those other more specific data as well. So yes, so this is correlation. Correlation is not causation. So those authors went, they were so surprised that they reanalyzed the data again, and they could prove, yes, our stratification of patients is correct. Our high exposure patients get more melanoma, get more non-melanoma skin cancer, is a risk ratio about 1.59, but those patients who get skin cancer, the overall survival is better, which was kind of counterintuitive. Also, if you look at 2 concomitant common diseases like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular mortality, the incidence of diabetes was lower, and the mortality from cardiovascular disease was lower as well. So on multiple parameters, the patients who went to the sun and got a lot of sun exposure did much better. Now, this is one study, right? We have a number of retrospective studies, so not as good quality of evidence, but this one kind of stands out because it's huge. It's the UK Biobank that people use to monitor global health outcomes. And this is now like almost 500,000 of patients who were screened for, you couldn't screen them for individual sun exposure. There was no questionnaire, but they were ranked according to the ambient radiation in the population and use of solaria, of tanning beds, because this was actually captured. And as you can see, those patients who used solaria, again, did better on any big health outcome, like cancer mortality, cardiovascular disease, and overall. Those who have high ambient sun exposure had better outcomes. This is something to think about. If you look at the literature, this is not the only two pieces, number of other papers of less good quality though, so I will not go through them, show the same pattern. More sun, longer survival, higher vitamin D concentrations, but it's a marker because supplementation of vitamin D doesn't work on those outcomes at all. And if anybody, there's actually an excellent review from a few years ago that summarizes this evidence, what we have now regarding sun exposure and vitamin D and health outcomes. Okay, so let's focus on a few points. One will be the cardiovascular system, the leading cause of death right now in the northern hemisphere, in the civilized, not civilized, in the industrialized countries, I would say this, but in the north, like US, Canada, Northern Europe as well. So again, sun exposure, less mortality, also reduction of blood pressure and a number of other cardiovascular outcomes. Okay? There's even some studies showing that patients who get a lot of phototherapy, like for vitiligo, patients get phototherapy for months for vitiligo. They don't have skin cancer, but interestingly enough, they have reduced cardiovascular mortality and reduced numbers of cerebrovascular events, which is kind of interesting observation. But again, this is retrospective. And actually the mechanism of this has been kind of figured out. And probably the key factor is nitric oxide. You know, we all know nitric oxide is this vasodilator, the beautiful molecule that we have that keeps our vascular system in health and going on. And this is what we learn in med school about nitric oxide production. We have nitric oxide synthase that synthesizes nitric oxide from arginine, and then the nitric oxide is used and then it's getting oxidized into the nitrite. And we never kind of follow on this. What happens to nitrite? Kind of disappears, but actually it doesn't. Nitrite can easily be decomposed. So it is in our body, it goes to the surface of our skin, to the organs, and if it meets the area where there is active microbiome, the bacteria can convert nitrate back to nitric oxide. They can even convert the superoxidized form of nitrogen, so nitrate, to nitrite, and then back to nitric oxide, which is especially important in the oral cavity in the mouth. So when probably 20% of the nitric oxide comes from the mouth and mouth microbiome, and the rest comes from the enzymatic production in the vessels. And that is why if people have poor oral hygiene and problems with teeth and problems with microbiome or use too much Listerine, the cardiovascular outcomes are horrible. And this is the first association between inflammation and cardiovascular outcome. It's actually not the skin, but the oral hygiene. Skin plays a special role here because our microbiome on the surface of the skin can produce nitric oxide. And this is strongly augmented by sunlight. So the skin is a storage of nitric oxide in forms of those organic nitric bonds. Ultraviolet promotes dissociation of this to nitric oxide and also production of nitrite that then bacteria can convert. It's kind of a complicated system, but it's measurable. So studies were done on like blood pressure, and they actually measured the nitric oxide. And if you give patient UVA, in this case they use UVA radiation, you can see a drop in the blood pressure here, and also the increase of the nitric oxide compounds in the blood. So if you irradiate the skin, there is a systemic effect giving you this cardiovascular effects in form of a lower blood pressure and vasodilation, which I guess is great if you look at the cardiovascular outcomes. Yeah. The sun and the skin is a huge endocrine organ, which we often forget. For example, the whole hypothalamo-pituitary axis is reproduced in the skin and is induced by ultraviolet B. So irradiation of the skin with UVB causes the production of CRF, corticotropin releasing factor, POMC, so propion-melanocorticotin, that gives the rise to ACTH and alpha, beta, gamma, melanocyte stimulating hormones, and also cortisol. So cortisol is produced in the skin. This has been showed very nicely. Also, testosterone is produced in the skin after sun exposure, which we'll come back to, and beta endorphin. And there is a local effect, there's also systemic effect. It's measurable in the blood, and we have measurable outcomes on the level of the entire body. For example, we can measure testosterone, effect of testosterone. Beta endorphin circulating produces this addiction to sun. We like to go to the sun because we're releasing beta endorphins all the time. And cortisol coming from the skin has a very interesting effect of the immune system. So there's a very subtle immunomodulation that has been discovered 30 years ago and you didn't understand why. Why exposure of UVA and UVB cause immunomodulation and kind of suppression of the immune responses without producing immunosuppression. I was really fascinated by this paper because here we're going from the level of biochemistry to the level that everybody can understand. UVB treatment induces romantic passion. I would normally not pay attention to this, but this paper appeared in Cell Reports, which is like a high double-digit impact factor journal, and they did not only show the phenomenon, but they also nailed what is the molecular mechanism of this. So this study was done in mice and in humans. It was done this way that people were exposed to ultraviolet B, and then they fill the passionate love scale questionnaire. I didn't even know that a thing like this exists. And the researchers found out that after being exposed to UVB, and I will cite this because they did in a very nice and gentle way, the feeling that the person whom they loved most passionately is the perfect romantic partner increased. Which translated normal language, if you are the partner, he will be much more attractive after you get out of the sun. That is one, vacations on the beach is not a good idea sometimes if you are in a relationship. Okay. In males, this was correlated to the level of testosterone. So remember our endocrine axis in the skin. So they could measure increased testosterone, and this translated into these feelings in males. But on the molecular level, this was correlated to the p53 gene. So we teach our residents p53, the crucial oncogene, is activated by DNA damage, by sun exposure. And in mice, deletion of this p53 inhibited this kind of a romantic feeling. So they could even measure romantic feeling in mice. And you can read the paper how it was done. It was less romantic than you think in mice. Okay, so now when you look at posters like this, you will instantly understand why it is sun, sand, and romance. And if you look at the guy, he's kind of good looking, a bit receding hairline, so a lot of testosterone, good facial hair, right? And very, very confident, right? We know why, p53 testosterone. And then if you look at this I created myself, it's a romance killer, right? If you don't want to be in a relationship, just put the SPF on you, and you can even see he is depleting in the testosterone big, also very worried, right? So look at this guy, very confident. He's very worried he will be getting skin cancer. It's not good, So a little bit of sun is good, especially for males. All right. UV controls our appetite. Again, high-level paper from Nature Metabolism showing during summer we eat more, but only males eat more. Females don't have the seasonal variation. We do because we need our fat for the winter to hunt, during winter for our families, and again, the mechanism has been figured out. UV through p53 induces the expression of ghrelin, the hormone that increases appetite in subcutaneous fat. Extremely interesting. So we've been talking about p53 now twice. Once is for the testosterone. Second one is for ghrelin. So that's this is our common view on p53. We have DNA damage. We activate p53, gets phosphorylated, binds to the areas of damage of DNA and promotes repair. Also induces expression of the genes that are involved in DNA repair, and this causes a lot of anti-cancer outcomes like cell cycle arrest, DNA repair, senescence, apoptosis. It's what we teach. But there is a second arm to p53, and this is metabolic link and sun link to the steroid hormone production, like the testosterone. to the induction of ghrelin, and then the appetite regulation, probably also the regulation of the mental well-being. In females, though, this ghrelin pathway is blocked by estrogen. So the estrogens induced in the skin will block the ghrelin. Testosterone can't do that. That's why women don't eat during summer. We do. We'll put on weight a little bit during summer. Okay. So we know the mechanism of action, not only the phenomena. Sunlight brightens memory. So for the residents who listener here, study for exams outside. Get some sunlight. Again, study both on mice and humans. Here they are, it's a cell paper, so high level paper, showing unexpected mechanism of action through urocanic acid. We teach you a bit about urocanic acid during residency, but not much. So urocanic acid is a product of the decomposition of filaggrin. Filaggrin is this protein that helps our skin to produce skin barrier. The mutation of filaggrin can give you atopic dermatitis, but the product of filaggrin degradation is urocanic acid. It is a sun acceptor, sun receptor, and it gets isomerized from the trans to cis form. And the cis form is biologically active form. And here, the researchers found out that this cis urocanic acid induced by sunlight induces production of glutamate in the central nervous system. And this translates into the better long memory and better learning skills. So very, very interesting, done both in mice and in humans. So here I would like to summarize, the health benefits, and we are not talking about everything because time is running and I can't spend a day. I would like to spend a day teaching, talking about the sun, but we have been talking about the mood. We're talking about longevity, about cardiovascular system. We didn't talk about eye health, which is a huge, interesting issue. We didn't talk about biological rhythms, because this is not just UVB, this is also visible light. We're talking about immune regulation and the regulation of the appetite and obesity. And we all know about vitamin D, but probably vitamin D does not play the major role here. Vitamin D is something different. Those are the direct effect of sunlight through the skin on us, okay? Yeah, so what are we waiting for? We shouldn't be here. We should be going outside and enjoying the sun. But I think that some of you listening to this will still say, what about the skin cancer? Okay, we still don't want to get skin cancer. And the health benefits can be far away, but the skin cancer is here now. So I will just use the last 5 minutes to tell you or to try to show you my view on the role of sun in the cancer and how this should be balanced to the general health benefits. Okay. So we can see the orthodox view of sun and ultraviolet is it's a carcinogen. It's a major contributor to skin cancer. If we didn't have sun exposure, we would not have any skin cancer. The risk is so dependent on the UV dose. It's linear. So the more you get, the worse. Sunburns are even worse. Okay, and if we could protect ourselves with efficient photoprotection, we'll eliminate the skin cancer. I don't think it's correct. So UV is a carcinogen, we know this, but I don't think that the relation is linear, and I don't believe that extreme photoprotection will do much difference. And the Swedish study confirmed that. If you have read one of the tables, you will see that patients who had extreme photoprotection actually had more skin cancer, not melanoma skin cancer. The usual argument linking sun and skin cancer is the example of Australia. So if you look at the UV exposure worldwide, Australia is very highly exposed, this violet color, and indeed there was an epidemic of skin cancer in Australia. This was a very good proof of a link, and there is a link. But if you look today, the distribution of skin cancer worldwide doesn't fit at all with the UV exposure. So actually the higher incidence now is even not Australia, the United States, according to the last paper. Canada is not much behind, and do we get that much sun? Not really. Okay, Australia is still there. Okay, and Northern Europe, like Sweden, Norway, is extremely high, but they get very little sun. We actually measured this, and all UV in Denmark that you will get during July and August. 90% of UV during 2 months. The rest is not important. Okay. And a good example is US, United States, because United States, northern United States, get very little sun, and you can see this here, this blue color, and the southern part, especially here, has a lot of UV exposure, okay? But there's no correlation with the skin cancer. So you can see hotspot of skin cancer very up north and very low south, and if you plot this against UV exposure, you will see that there's no correlation whatsoever. There is one correlation, and this is the correlation of the amount of dermatologists. So the more dermatologists around, the more skin cancer is diagnosed. It's not because we're carcinogenic, right? It's just because we see this. If you compare this to smoking, which is a well-known carcinogen, there is a linear and strong relationship. So we're not even there where the smoking is regarding. There's an interesting paper in New England Journal of Medicine trying theoretically to model this skin cancer epidemic. So this is the observed incidence of skin cancer. If you zero this in 1975, now we're like 6 times higher incidence in 2015, still a few years ago, now it's even higher. But if you look at the contribution of ultraviolet in terms of hazard or risk ratios, it is about 1.3, 1.5. We can assume 2, the double. This will be expected curve. So we are not even near what is happening. So UV cannot explain this. There are other factors than ultraviolet. And I have even calculated number needed to harm by UV, and this is like 83. So you need to expose 83 persons to high dose UV to gain 1 case of cancer. Okay? So is it a lot? Is it a little? You can think yourself. Okay. There's a pattern. So I showed the pattern of incidence. There's a pattern of increase. So here's the delta values. Surprisingly, China now is the country with the highest percentile increase in skin cancer incidence, not related to UV exposure at all. I guess related to the lifestyle. And the biggest contributors to the skin cancer epidemics is United States here and industrial countries from the East and China. Okay. Yeah. Very interesting and kind of disturbing data. And you will say, yeah, it's because people don't use sun protection. Actually, it's not true. This is the data I plotted on the use of sunscreens, on the sales of sunscreens, and the use of sun protective clothing, and it's exploding. It's very widely used. It's bought and it's used. So even though we use a lot of sun protection, we still have this huge increase in skin cancer. Okay, so dermatologist's message is use more. So use more of something that doesn't work. I don't think it's a good idea. There's some data on the protective effect of the sunscreens on melanoma. There's a prospective study. There is a reduction of risk at best to half. This translates in the number needed to treat over 100. So you need to sun protect 100 individuals to prevent 1 early stage melanoma. Okay, so similar to the effect of sun on cancer. So you have like 100, number needed to harm, number needed to treat. So what I think we're forgetting that, this is the view that we often associate with sun. Sun produces mutations in DNA, which is true, we know this. And then we have this mutated cell, and this mutated cell produces cancer, we have a bit of inflammation around. And this is like a genetic process, which I don't think is true. We are forgetting this inflammation. Inflammation is super important. And we know what is inflammation coming from. Is the arachidonic acid cascade producing those pro-inflammatory prostaglandins and leukotrienes. And this is modifiable by the environment. For example, if you eat a lot of omega-3 fatty acids like fish and marine life, I guess, you will be diverging this pathway to anti-inflammatory, to other leukotrienes and prostaglandins. But if you eat a lot of seed oils like sunflower oil or canola oil, the opposite will happen. You will feed the system of omega-6 fatty acids, unsaturated fatty acids, and the inflammation will be more and more. I'm thinking that, when we have patients, we have a lot of referral of patients with dry skin, irritative skin. This is inflammation in the skin. And we don't know why this happens. We treat it as a symptom, but we never ask what the cause of this is. This could be environmental, this could be nutritional. One of the patients told me, Dr. G, I have horrible life. I live in boxes all my life. And I thought of this, how true, my life is also a bit in boxes, we go to work in a box, we're in the hospital, we're in the outpatient, it's a box with artificial sunlight. This is the wet dream of the architects, how to produce a modern office. It's a box in the box, it's like ideal. We have no natural sunlight, we have no access to it, and think how much we may be missing in terms of health benefits. All doctors should know this seminal paper of Jared Diamond, What is the Worst Mistake in History of Human Race? This is invention of agriculture and eating plants. And he puts a good argument that this caused population growth because we could produce huge amounts of food, but also caused malnutrition in the end, epidemic disease like tuberculosis, high mortality and division of classes. And we've spent the last 500 years of medicine trying to fight the consequences of this. And we were very successful. But now we have a new epidemics, which is obesity, autoimmune diseases, cardiovascular diabetes, and mental health issues not known. And we know some of those causes, like smoking, cancer, right? Ultra-processed food, like inflammatory disease, autoimmune disease, microplastics. Dr. Osman here actually writes a paper about microplastics and inflammation and pollution of the environment. And we always forget about the sun. So ChatGPT to produce those kind of pictures for me to match those. And this is what ChatGPT showed me. This is like before, and this is like now. And again, I say, how true. This is often my life. We sit and we write papers, and the computer at the poor artificial light, and we think we're so good. Maybe it's not such a good idea. Maybe we should go back to the environment and try to benefit from the effects of the sunlight. So, and it's my little talk with those photos from Canada and from Denmark. From Denmark, because my whole country, and Vincent comes from Denmark. So this is the beach in Denmark, beautiful sun. But we have also beautiful areas here with a lot of sun. So this is my neighborhood, where I live. Beautiful sun, which I enjoy if I can every day, if the temperature is warmer than minus 30 degrees. And thank you so much for coming and listening to my talk.
Thanks, Robert. Oh, very thought-provoking. It's just typical conversation with Robert. He always gets different neurons firing. So, the most obvious question to me is in some of those studies where you showed, sun exposure having the positive effect compared to avoiding the sun. What about sun exposure? You started talking about SPF protection and toxicity to the environment. So are you able to finish that thought in terms of, is there toxicity to human beings, and is going out there exposed but having SPF negating the positive effect of sun exposure? Is there any evidence to suggest?
There is some evidence. So when I was a PhD student, a paper appeared that sunscreens mess up with hormonal balance, especially in men, and reduce the concentration of testosterone. And we could see that. But this was not the worst. The worst is that we had a control group and we measured sunscreen component in urine. And we found out it's not only people who put sunscreen, everyone has sunscreen component in urine. This is everywhere. It's in drinking water, it's everywhere. And we didn't follow up on this. It's probably impossible to get money and to investigate it. But yeah, sunscreen chemicals are in our environment, and you and I were drinking this, and we have it in us. Even more so if you use it all the time. So I would say I'm not against sunscreen. It's not like never use it, but use it if needed. Like if we travel to Hawaii and we know we're going to the beach, use the sunscreen because you will get sunburn, bad sunburn. But this should be like a prevention of sunburn here now. This shouldn't be a routine, in my opinion. I am dissenting opinion in dermatology. I don't think we should be using this all the time. Can we ever measure this? I'm not sure. The effects can be like 20 years from now. It took us how many years to find out about smoking? It took us like 20 years, and this is risk ratio for smoking and lung cancer is 20. It's not 1.3, it's 20. It took us 20 years.
Do you present this information at dermatology conferences? And
No.
yeah.
No.
Not everybody.
Not everybody.
Subscribes.
Not everybody. Not subscribe. Not everybody can dispute the data, and so people say, "Oh, are you against everyone else?" Yes, I'm against many, but there are many dermatologists. So those papers were done also in dermatology and published in highly ranking journals. So it's not like my private opinion. It is there.
Cell Reports is legit, no
Yeah.
question.
So I think
I saw
Mo
Mo
was first, yeah.
and then we'll go around.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay, they're not related. So we see a very similar seasonal variation in flares related to autoimmunity, so ankylosing, lupus, and so on. And actually inversely correlate, I mean, it kind of follows that kind of correlation that you described. Yet, in clinical practice, we tell our lupus patients, hey, you need to stay away from the sun. It's actually really bad for you and it causes flares and blah, blah, blah. Can you comment on this? This is my first question. My second question, which is unrelated, is related to this arachidonic pathway, arachidonic acid pathway. So as you know, NSAIDs are actually COX-2 inhibitors, which inhibit the conversion of arachidonic acid into the various kind of inflammatory mediators. Is there evidence to support reduced cancer risk in patients who routinely use NSAIDs in contrast to those who don't?
So question number 2, no.
And just maybe repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. So the question is, will COX inhibitors block the inflammation in the skin? And the answer is no to both. They don't block the pathway as we see in the skin, and I don't know why. I never investigated this. And there are some studies, effect is extremely weak. I don't think it's the way to go. The first question was about lupus and autoimmune disease. So lupus is an exception because lupus patients are photosensitive. They don't have the, so there are some exceptions to the rule. One is immunosuppressed patients. We know if you have a depressed immune system, you'll develop a lot of skin cancer. The second category will be patients with DNA repair defects, and then the lupus, and yeah. So those are out. Those are clinical. It's not healthy. Those are clinical cases. So they shouldn't go to the sun because the disease will flare. That's for sure.
Tom, and then we'll come back.
Yes, like Sam mentioned, very provocative and brilliant presentation. I agree with you that we need to change our stance, but I don't think you get derms to accept that. Mostly because all the papers that you cite are never read by derms. We don't read Nature, we don't read Cell, we don't read them. So all those very, provocative papers that are challenging our thinking are never read by derms. And all they read are the journals about, oh, cancer. What I want to make though is, I think you're on the right path about, we should view this as both potentially beneficial and harmful, but how do we get that message to the public? Like, what do I tell my cancer patient? I'm going to see them, in 15 minutes with melanoma, how to be wise about the sun. I always use the words be wise about the sun. I had a mentor in New York who was like, oh, you have to avoid the sun and like live under a rock type of mentality, and I never say, I say, you need to be more sensible and wise about your relationship with the sun, and meaning, yes, avoid the sun if you can, in terms of the peak hours, that kind of stuff. But how do you get that message to the public? If the public heard your talk and say, yeah, those dermatologists have been telling us crap for years. We don't need to worry about sunscreens, because you were right. Sunscreen's got a mixed feeling of benefit for melanoma prevention. Some say it's beneficial, some say it's not. For the most part, it's very modest. Benefit is like very minimal, and yet that's the go-to. Derms always say the first thing. They don't say minimize sun exposure. They say sunscreens, and they tell you what to do. The industry brainwash us, and we have to use these high things. So what kind of message can you get to the public? If they heard your talk, if this was a TED talk and was on YouTube, like they'll say those guys are just telling us crap. We should just live life like we always have.
So the question was, how do we get this message to public? And of course, I have no idea. One way is to have a famous person to do it, like Coco Chanel. One trip to Cannes, and the whole fashion world change overnight. Second thing is the citation I often use when we talk is that the science progresses one funeral at a time. Maybe, the new generation will see the data, and I don't know what will be the best way. But I think, at least we can start with us and don't advocate mindless sun exposure, like every day, whatever your skin color is, whatever the weather is, put the sunscreen on. This, I think, is wrong.
Well, they tell us the UV rating every day, whether this is the day that you should be putting sunscreen, like I always thought that was so excessive, It's cloudy, put sunscreen on.
Yes, thank you very much, Robert. Excellent presentation. I've been telling my patients to get the sun, and I treat skin cancer. But I tell them to do it, no more than each person is different. Somebody is very fair, they just need maybe 5 minutes a day. If somebody is with more richly pigmented skin, they may need more.
Yes.
And constantly exposed areas for a protection like the face, okay, you may get a little bit more, but get it on the rest of the body. But my question is about that study that you show correlation between solarium and cardiovascular mortality, for example. Because to me, people who go to solarium sometimes are people who also go to the gym. People who also look after their bodies better. So they, their diet may be different. They exercise more. They maybe have a different perspective on, in terms of their financial output. So they go maybe to holiday, spots in the winter, and again being active. So have they pinpointed that that's what it was? It was that solarium and cardiovascular outcome, or not?
So the question is whether patients or people who use solarium also are more trained, go to the gym and have healthy lifestyle. I think they do. And there's a huge drawback of all epidemiology studies. You can't always pinpoint. You need this prospective study. The Swedish study is the only prospective study that we know when all the other factors were equalized, like your income, your social status. All this was in the study. So yeah, but the thing is, we need multiple lines of evidence, and there's no single study showing increased mortality after the sun, and number of studies showing the decreased. So there's maybe something, right about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments about the confounders here, particularly around socioeconomic status.
This was measured in the Swedish study. So many of those studies
they corrected?
Yes. The US study showing the influence of UV and different latitudes also had socioeconomic status, and it is on the slide. And there is a bit of correlation between this as well, but no correlation to sun exposure.
Sure, you have this data, but if it really is truly all due to sun, I mean, just based on the latitude of the different countries, are there population data to say like there's higher, lower mortality in like certain areas, like industrial countries, similar type of status, like you said, Canada versus the US versus Mexico versus, with a different sun. Did you show that data?
No, but and there's data like this, but this I think is a lot of confounders, because you have different diet if you live in the sunny southern country like Italy versus Denmark. A lot of oil there, very different diets. I don't think you can easily correlate, but generally the more south, the better cardiovascular outcomes. That's definitely it.
Particularly in certain times of the year.
Certain times of the year.
Yeah. Mo, since you're here, I'm going to give you. Before I put it up.
I have to ask this question because young Willem's not here. So young Willem is a huge supporter of vitamin D, and so am I. And we prescribe high doses of vitamin D for our patients, and we usually tell them to take vitamin K2 to help their absorption and so on. And this is purely for immunomodulatory effects. You presented, or you suggested, that vitamin D supplementation may not be as beneficial as we think, and yet the data, particularly in MS patients, is very supportive of this. Can you comment on this?
MS is probably the only exception I know. So I'm not saying vitamin D is useless. Vitamin D is super important. Just the focus on my talk was on the other aspects of UV, beyond the vitamin D. I think vitamin D is super important. We have clinics together, so you know that I am a huge supporter of vitamin D supplementation. So like 2000 units plus 100, 120 microgram K2. You need K2 to move the calcium to the bone rather than to the tissues. So I think it's important, but simply 45 minutes, I can't cover everything, but I agree with you. Supplement, I think I will supplement.
So this is an interesting observation. Lenora writes here, the country with the strongest population health sun protection to the point of affecting sea life, as you showed, Australia, has had excellent longevity increases over the past 10 to 20 years versus many or most other countries. What are your thoughts on that?
Interesting question. I would say I would like to see the data actually correlating, because taking two big outcomes and correlating to each other, I don't think it's a good science. There's a great website showing different correlation, like consumption of margarine in Maine versus divorce rate in California. It's beautifully correlated. But do we think it's a causation? No. So I don't know. I think more research is needed, and the purpose of this talk is to maybe open up for other ideas,
Exactly.
not being too religious about one or another. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. It's certainly thought provoking. And then the second one that I think is actually many of us are interested in. What would you say to people who wish to avoid excess photo aging?
That's a great question. So UV causes photo aging. And look at me, I don't use photo protection, and I am photo aged. You get wrinkles. That's a problem. Yeah, that's a problem. Your face will get older, and the use of sunscreens will prevent photo aging. Yeah.
Oh, there you
I
go.
think a lot of photo aging is though excess of inflammation. And I will go this way, try to reduce the inflammatory load.
Yeah, so Coco Chanel aside, I mean,
she was a smoker too, as you know,
yes,
the big
exactly.
cigarette, yeah.
I was
So
just
she
gonna
didn't
say
get it right. Yes.
Okay, so Stan Houston is asking, is the melanoma risk particularly correlated with episodes of acute sunburn, which presumably could respond to sensible protective measures?
Yes, it is, and this is the strongest factor. So the cumulative sun exposure doesn't matter much. It matters a little, but not much. So the sunburns matter a lot, especially in the childhood. And this is where sun protection comes. Not cover the kid, with the clothing, but just maybe don't put him on the beach in the middle of the day. And kids don't like that anyway. So sensible sun protection.
All right, I think we've pretty much covered most of the questions online. Again, I just really enjoy talking to you, Robert, because you always get me thinking. Okay, we have time for one more if you want.
Question?
Go ahead.
How do you think diet impacts sensitivity to UV exposure in general?
Oh, there's a huge impact. Actually, we discussed it with Dr. Chow, who's here in the audience, and there's a number of papers showing consumption of vegetables that are rich in photosensitizing compounds like photocumulins, will increase your sensitivity to decrease sensitivity to sunlight quite substantially. Consumption, studies on this, consumption of seed oils produce pro-inflammatory state in the skin. You can read it out on the MED dose. MED is minimal erythema dose. So we measured the amount of UVB, narrow band UVB, which is necessary to produce erythema of the skin, and there are huge differences. So yeah, but this is not well investigated. So we know the seed oils, probably omega-6, and the arachidonic acid pathway, and we know about some compounds from some plants, especially carrots, parsley, celery, yeah. Even once in Denmark, we had such an epidemic of people coming with bad sunburns to our department. Say, I can't understand this. So there was a batch of carrots that was in the supermarkets that were very enriched in photocumulins. Yeah.
Celery.
Good example is the tequila sunburn, right? You have the tequila with a lime and you drink it and stay on the beach, and this gives very bad sunburns. We know this in dermatology. Maybe it's not well known outside dermatology. Tequila sunburn, yeah. It's not the tequila, it's the lime. It's the lime, yes.
And so, sorry, just going back, so celery is sun sensitizing.
Yeah.
Okay. There you go.
End of story, yeah.
Those of us who don't enjoy celery, it's another reason not to have it.
Well, not everyone reacts the same way. There's like metabolic to this as well, so it's.
I mean, of course.
Kilo of the stuff, so.
Yeah.
So you can eat a
Like
kilo
the
of stuff.
juices she was saying.
Some do, some juice.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah,
juice.
so I said you
Yeah.
can, you can eat it.
Carrot and celery juice.
And of course, I won't touch the $1 million question, which is very personal to me, which is pigmentation and the impact of natural pigmentation on all of this. I mean, you showed some of the data, but there's probably some variation, right?
It's a huge, I think, huge issue, difficult to discuss in the current environment. But if you look at the evolution, how well we're adapted, increasing and decreasing pigmentation in response to sunlight, I think there may be an issue of people who migrate from the south to the north and not getting enough sun and having the skin not exposed enough.
Okay.
I'm thinking about the epidemic of diabetes in Indian population here, for example, which is connected to sugar sugary diets, but the same sugary diet in India will not give that much diabetes.
Right.
So is it sun? I don't know.
And
It's very interesting.
indigenous population.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
All right. Wow. That was really good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, on behalf of the department. And I'll just wish everyone a wonderful weekend and go Blue Jays.